Hello, everybody, and welcome to Sangoma's webinar, Colp Hard Facts, Myths, Tips, and Tricks, with the ever-popular Josh Colp, Asterisk lead, gravel biker, and all-around good guy. My name is Michael White. I'm the Vice President of Open Source Sales here at Sangoma. Josh, how are you today?
I'm great, and thank you for the awesome introduction.
Well, without further ado, I'd like to hand the floor over to you, sir. Thank you very much in advance.
Thanks. I'd also like to say that Lauren is also on the line, probably muted. So if anyone does end up submitting any questions for free PBX related stuff, then I will volunteer him to handle those since I'm not very good in the world of free PBX. With that, let's get started. So Colp Hard Facts, Myths, Tips, and Tricks. So some people who have joined here or signed up for this webinar might be thinking, hey, what is Colp Hard Facts? And Colp Hard Facts is a social media hashtag that I started quite a few years ago at this point. And I use it when I have comments, tricks, observations, or just ponderings on the industry, on Asterisk, on VoIP, on supporting people. It's pretty much my catch-all social media hashtag for that kind of stuff. You can check out past posts on that using Twitter search. And going forward, I'll be doing that on Twitter as long as Twitter remains a thing. But I'm also on Mastodon, as are many other people on the mastodon.ca instance as jcolp. So you can follow me over there as well. And with that, let's get into things. So a myth, Asterisk documentation is poor. So when it comes to open source projects, there's a wide spectrum of the state of the documentation. Some documentation is great, some documentation doesn't even exist. In the case of Asterisk, I like to think we do our best and sit pretty much in the middle. We try to document stuff as much as we can. So some examples of that, Dialplan applications and functions, configuration files. And when it comes to configuration files, newer implementations of things using a more recent programming interface called Sorcery, documentation is actually enforced to exist. You cannot add something new without documenting it. It just, like if I add an option to PJSIP right now and I forget to document it, that option is not going to work. So we try to nudge developers as well to add documentation for things. We also have documentation on Dialplan logic, how things work, and how to configure SIP. When I'm talking about how to configure SIP, I am speaking about PJSIP. There's a lot of documentation for that, some that probably you guys out there don't even know exist. So documentation location. We have wiki.asterisk.org. We have the sample configuration files, and we also have the Asterisk blog on asterisk.org, which, while it's not really documentation, it is still a useful resource because it talks about the development of things. It goes into the finer points of things. And we try to post a blog post every 2 weeks about things we've seen, things we want to document, or not really document, but things we want to communicate to the community at large. So if you're not familiar with the Asterisk blog, please check it out. It's a great place. Now, there are times where the documentation does let you down. Something that you may want to know about isn't documented. And so you'll end up needing help. So let's go into a tip about getting help. The best location is community.asterisk.org, which is our community forum, which is using Discourse. We do have mailing lists, but these days they don't really see a ton of use. So I highly recommend using the forum instead. In fact, going forward, maybe in a few months, I will actually look at dropping the mailing lists themselves because the maintenance and basically email has moved on, and trying to keep those going is a high maintenance item, while the community forum can actually act in the same fashion as a mailing list if you want. So it's just a better experience over there. Do not use the issue tracker. It is not a support mechanism. We will instead send you to one of the various other resources, such as the community forum. Remember to provide as much information as possible. You may think that something isn't really relevant, when in reality, it may be truly critical to solving your question or your problem. A good example is simply stating, my phone doesn't ring, isn't really helpful to any community member who's trying to help you. Another thing is that acknowledge and accept that people helping aren't obligated to, and there is no SLA. So if something is urgent, that urgency doesn't just move on to the community to solve it within your time frame. As well, try to read error messages first. In recent years, we've tried to make our our error messages as detailed as we can. A good example of this is in PJSIP. If a phone calls an extension that doesn't exist in the Dialplan, we will tell you what phone, what extension they called, and what context, so you can better diagnose what is going on. Finally, don't poke people asking for an update every few hours. It's more likely that you'll just put people off from helping you. Additionally, don't private message them trying to escalate it, because in the open source community, there is no escalation. You're just going to probably make it so that that person doesn't really want to help you. And now for a trick, native p-asserted identity. So I've seen a lot of people use the Dialplan for just adding a p-asserted identity header. I think this originates from the time when Asterisk didn't have native support for this in either ChanSIP. Well, it would have been back in the time when ChanSIP was the only channel driver. In PJSIP, we have the send PAI option, which will just automatically add this header in. So use that if you can. And this really applies not just for PAI, but use the native functionality in Asterisk when possible. Don't try to reinvent things. You may end up not covering certain use cases or causing problems down the line. So always use the native functionality if at all possible. And now for a myth. Asterisk just works how everyone wants. Business logic. Asterisk is used by many people and has some built-in business logic. You may not agree with it. An example of this is AppQ. AppQ, by its very definition, is the embodiment of business logic of how someone, when AppQ was originally written, believed queues should behave. Some people agree with this, some people don't. Neither are right or wrong. It's just that the needs are different and the business needs are different, and thus the business logic is different. A realization that you have to come to and accept is that it's unreasonable to require any open source project, not just Asterisk, to change themselves to how you expect them to work. Our philosophy in Asterisk for the past few years is to give the required fundamentals to allow that to happen externally. A good example of that is the Asterisk REST interface, which provides the building blocks to allow queues to be done externally from Asterisk, where you can just write your business logic how you want. A fun fact is that this is how Switchvox queues are actually implemented. Switchvox doesn't have AppQ, it's not even built. Their queuing implementation is done using ARI, so it's written externally. As well, Switchvox doesn't have any special additional ARI functionality. They're using the same ARI that everyone else has access to. So when it comes to business logic, I'm sorry, but it just may not be possible to make Asterisk behave as you specifically want for your use case. In that case, like I said, look at what we exposed to allow you to accomplish that instead. A tip, scrubbing private information. Asterisk is an open source project, so when asking for help, anyone can see the information you provide. It's not a private communication. This includes the issue tracker, mailing list, forums, etc. So you need to scrub anything that you consider private information before posting. We can't make that judgment or decision for you on what is considered private and what isn't considered private. That's on you to do. Additionally, down the road, if time passes and you want to remove that information, we can do our best to remove it. However, like I said, Asterisk is an open source project. That information will have likely been cataloged, scrubbed, put elsewhere. So we can only do so much. And now a good one, WebRTC is easy / just works. WebRTC is fundamentally hard. It can lull you into a false sense of simplicity and just working if you use the demos and examples that are out there to just establish a communication from one browser to another. In reality, when you actually deploy it, that's when things fall down. And that's because WebRTC is made up of many, many things. You've got ICE, stun, and turn, which still come from the VoIP world. They actually predate WebRTC. You also have the JavaScript APIs that you interact with from your actual application in JavaScript. You also have different browser behavior. The WebRTC implementation in Firefox is different from the one in Safari, from the one in Chrome. And so those inherently can have different behavior and also different things implemented. One may implement like one thing, one may not implement that. So it can get complicated real fast. And if you're deploying this in the real world, you really need to learn it all in order to be able to debug what's going on. Another thing about WebRTC is that it does not define the way that you do signaling. A popular method is to use SIP. However, if you do that, then that also brings in something else you need to learn, SIP. So in practice, network conditions can cause issues. If you're at a hotel Wi-Fi network, that can cause issues with WebRTC. Browser versions can cause issues. You upgrade from one version to another, boom, something broke. Asterisk versions can cause issues. Things have sort of slowed down to a degree when it comes to WebRTC, so this doesn't happen as much in recent times. But in the past, something in the browser would change, and we'd have to update Asterisk to account for that. So using an old version may not be feasible there as well. JavaScript can cause issues. Debugging things is generally hard. Browsers, to most web developers, are black boxes. They don't know what's going on underneath inside the browsers. They just know the JavaScript side of things. So if something's going on with the browser, you now need to figure out how to debug the browser. And an acceptance that you have to make is that WebRTC won't just work all the time. It will fail even if you try your hardest, even if you proxy media. There will be cases where it just won't work. Now a tip, open ports means being reactive. The internet is a harsh place. I actually read this morning a post from, it was published yesterday, from Cloudflare about yet another DDoS issue when it comes to the SLP standard. I initially read it as SIP and was quite concerned. But it was just a traffic case where you can just 2,200 times your traffic. And so the internet in reality has just become a really harsh place. Another thing is that if you have roaming clients, so soft phones on mobile phones, you may have to have an open port, and that opens you up for attack. So some things that can be done to help with this is that using a non-standard port can help a bit. However, they do continue to scan broadly. Using something like AppyBan can still firewall bad actors that have been discovered. And then using something like fail to ban can make things more reactive, such that if someone starts attacking your system and that gets noticed, then they can be firewalled off. However, and this not just applies to Asterisk or VoIP, ultimately you have to accept that having an open port means dealing with unwanted traffic. Another strategy which hasn't been put on here is if you know that your roaming clients are only going to be within a certain country, then firewalling off other countries can be a viable approach to minimize the amount of unwanted traffic that you actually receive. So it's really situational and what's going on. So a nice trick, PJSIP line support. Line support was one of the things I had in mind when figuring out the design of PJSIP, and it actually led to a design choice of having a pluggable mechanism for how incoming traffic is going to be identified and associated with an endpoint. That's a totally pluggable mechanism. Anything can register into that process, and using whatever logic it determines, it can then use the appropriate endpoint. So PJSIP line support, this is used on outbound SIP registrations. And the way it works is that it will place a unique identifier in the SIP contact that is stored on the remote server. Ideally, when you receive a call from that remote server, an invite, in that invite should be that unique identifier. I'm using the words should be because the RFC states that it should be there, but in practice, that's not always guaranteed. So this isn't functionality that is guaranteed to work 100% of the time, but it works quite often regardless. What it does is upon reception of that SIP invite, if that unique identifier is present, we can tie that call back to the outbound registration. And on that outbound registration, you specify an endpoint, and then that incoming call uses that endpoint. This removes the need to do the IP-based matching of incoming traffic, which in PJSIP isn't as problematic as it was in the past with ChanSIP, but it still means that you just don't have to worry about actually configuring that. To use this, you set line equals yes on the outbound registration and also the endpoint option, which specifies the endpoint to use for the incoming SIP call. So if you are registering to remote side, I highly suggest giving this option a try. It can simplify your configuration a little bit. Another tip, be boring. So don't use obscure or non-core Asterisk functionality if you can. For those who may not be aware, if you go into Make Menu Select in Asterisk, you can look around at each module and there will be a support level. A support level dictates the, as you might expect, kind of level of support you can expect. So core stuff is backed by Sangoma. So if you file an issue against something that is core supported, that will go into our backlog to hopefully eventually get worked. Extended support means that it is community supported. There's absolutely no guarantee anyone will ever look at it. And then deprecated means this is going to go away in the future. Usually when it comes to deprecated, we will also there specify what has replaced it instead. So to that end, keep things simple and boring. It makes it easier to support you if you have issues, and it's also more well tested. If Sangoma has put the core supported state on a module, it means that we're comfortable supporting it. As well, don't be overly clever. Like I said, try to be boring with it and use the right tool for the problem. So right now, I'm aware of an open issue when it comes to, or I'm having a back and forth with someone about it, using channel redirect in AMI, because they've essentially used a lot of AMI functionality to implement their own queuing mechanism. In that case, I would say use ARI instead of trying to mash all this stuff together. And it should go without saying, ARI is a core supported functionality of Asterisk. It is something that we, Sangoma, stand behind. Another tip, don't withhold logs if you don't understand them. So when you're asking for help, don't withhold logs saying they look fine. If you're asking for help, generally you don't really know what's going on and you may not be able to understand the logs. And so saying they look fine doesn't really help the situation. If you don't understand it, you can't really make that determination. And lack of logs fundamentally make things much more difficult for anyone trying to help you. Just a few days ago, I was looking at a crash issue in ARI and bridges. And as soon as I received the full logs and looked through them, I immediately knew what the fundamental underlying issue was. So logs are extremely helpful when it comes to issues, specifically full logs. They include debug information that can actually show what's going on underneath. If you don't provide logs, then it's likely you'll just drive away anyone who would help, because at that point, it just kind of becomes guessing what's going on and a lot of back and forth. And going back to an earlier point, there's no obligation by anyone in the community to actually look at your issue. So the more you can make it friendly and open for people to be able to help you, the more likely people actually will. So a myth, examples are complete solutions. Examples show how something can be done, but is not inherently a solution itself. I know a lot of people want to be able to just say, I want a, I'm gonna pull from Lauren here because I think he might have done this before. I want a complete solution that does callbacks when a channel hangs up and then automatically times out after a period of time and stuff. From a project perspective, we don't really currently provide that level of implementation, documentation, and detail. Instead, we document the parts that would be used for accomplishing such a thing. And so the examples we do have are really basic. So it's up to you to understand the example and turn it into what you want. Going back to the previous point, other people may not want to invest time into doing this for you for free. As well, an example not doing what you want is not a bug. So if you're trying to turn something into a bug in order to get someone to do it for you quicker for free, that's generally not going to work. Another tip, stay up to date. So old versions, limited to no support. We do fix issues in newer versions. At one point, I did some statistics gathering out of curiosity to understand the impact of using an old version of Asterisk in comparison to a new one, and kind of the percentage of bugs that were fixed. And it was about 50%. So 50% of the time, the issue had already been fixed in the newer version of Asterisk. If you do need to use an old version of Asterisk, this does mean when you're asking for help, you're asking someone else to potentially invest time into something that may already be fixed. And that's not something people may want to do for you. Another additional point is that the older the version, the less knowledge remains readily available in the minds of people. I don't remember 1.4, 1.8, the 1.6 series. 10 is iffy, 11 is iffy, 12 is okay, 13 and above is probably fine. So the more the project goes on, the less knowledge is going to be accessible to you for those old versions, unless you search archives and what you're looking for is there. So my recommendation is always stay up to date. We put a lot of time into ensuring that we don't break things, even upgrading across major versions. Our goal is to avoid breaking changes as much as we can. I believe on IRC, I've seen people upgrade from 13 to 16 to 18 to 20 with no issues. Going back to being boring, the more boring you are there, the better that upgrade path is likely to be as well. Another tip, don't change details when asking for help. When you're asking for help, please provide the complete details at the beginning. Don't change the details or requirements repeatedly. A good example is, I want to place a call from Alice to Bob. Okay, that's fine. Never mind, I also want to call Charlie. Okay. Oh, and if they don't answer, I want them to go to voicemail. Okay, and then if once a voicemail is left, I want to get sent an email or something. Reduce the back and forth as much as you can, so define the details and requirements immediately. The more back and forth there is, the more people have to extract information from you, the less likely people are going to be wanting to help you. So another myth, database usage has no consequences. Real-time and Asterisk are a sore point of mine. I've written a blog post in the past about why personally I don't think it's a great idea. So something that people may not realize is that directly connecting Asterisk to a database doubles your risk exposure of an issue. If your database has an issue, your Asterisk will now likely have an issue. In a real-time communications platform like Asterisk, there's generally how to put this? There's less willingness to accept problems. And so you want to minimize the chance of problems as much as you can. Some examples of things that can cause issues in Asterisk. So slowdowns in the database. If a query takes a prolonged period of time, then Asterisk itself can just block waiting for that to complete. PJSIP and the underlying sorcery architecture has a caching mechanism that can help with that, but it can only help. It cannot completely solve the issue. A good example of this is accepting an inbound SIP registration. The persistence of that information in the database isn't cached. It goes direct to the database, meaning if the database takes seconds to actually insert that record into the database, then the handling of that SIP registration is going to hang for several seconds. Another issue is loss of connectivity. If you lose connectivity, then Asterisk can block waiting to connect back to the actual database, or some of the information can't be retrieved, in which case your Asterisk now doesn't have the correct complete configuration. And ultimately, this can cause calls to fail or Asterisk to hang. So if you can avoid directly connecting Asterisk to a database, then I highly suggest doing so. Personally speaking, I see nothing wrong with taking information from a database and constructing the Asterisk configuration files from that information. In the case of PJSIP, that is a highly efficient and quick operation. Nothing is blocked. The handling of SIP traffic or calls are not blocked at all while that configuration is being read in, parsed, interpreted. Only when that is done is there a small amount of time where things can block, but it is minuscule. Previously, people may not have used that approach with ChanSIP because ChanSIP's configuration handling occurred within the same mechanism that handled the SIP traffic. So as you were actually reading in the configuration, interpreting, parsing it, your SIP traffic was being blocked. But that is not the case with PJSIP. And another nice benefit is that if the database is unreachable, your asterisk is going to keep on trucking along perfectly fine. And now we get to the fun questions time. And Mike and multiple people have been talking about what to do about questions. Do you want to do questions, Mike?
I can do questions. Hi, everybody. We did notice that we didn't get too many questions. I failed to mention the questions interface. So if we wanted to, Josh, it's up to you if you want to wait a couple minutes and allow some more questions to flow through.
Sure. If I can make this bigger, I will stop sharing my screen. Yes, I'll do my standard spiel. Questions, comments, feel free to submit them. We'll do our best to answer them as much as possible. Like I said, Lauren is here if you have any free PBX questions. Mike is here if you want to talk sales, and I'm here if you want to talk asterisk. There we go, undock.
We did get a new question from Ethan Wilson. The question is, there was a portion about WebRTC and learning everything. Is Sangoma going to bring back training opportunities?
Who wants to answer that?
I'll answer that. So currently, we are in active conversations about bringing many aspects of training back. If you have specific questions about which trainings you'd like to see, feel free to reach out to me directly. Again, this is Mike White. Happy to help out there. We've got a free PBX question. Let me read that one here. So yes, for free PBX, what is the support protocol for support with reference to, say, what would be SIPstation versus free PBX?
I can take that one. Lauren here. So with regard to supporting things, in that case, it's SIPstation versus free PBX. It wouldn't really matter which support path you follow, whether you go through free PBX or SIPstation. If you genuinely believe it's a SIPstation issue, they're both ultimately going to be handled by Sangoma support. So, but more generally, there is often situations that arise in support where the person reporting the issue thinks it's one thing, and a little bit of examination reveals it to be something else. So that's always evaluated on a case-by-case basis. Not entirely sure I'm answering the question as asked. I guess the end result is you have a problem with free PBX. There are support avenues available, both paid and included with commercial module purchases. And if you have a problem with SIPstation, you do have access to support as well, based on your account status with SIPstation. Thanks,
Lauren. We've got one more question here from Larry, and I'm pretty sure this one's for you, Josh. Let me read that one to you. It says, my phone doesn't ring. Do you know what's wrong?
Yes, it's not plugged in.
No, that's a yes or no question. A full answer to that is yes. Josh knows what's wrong.
I was gonna say you're not my supervisor. I don't think you are technically my supervisor, so that is technically valid.
Excellent. Folks, any more questions coming in?
Yeah, there is. Are there any expanded examples with reference to the JSON commands and speech recognition? I see AEAP, the Asterisk Extensible Application Protocol, now, but limited examples. At the moment, I use a Google, the Google API, but getting requests for connects to chatbots. The full protocol specification of that is on wiki.asterisk.org, and we also have the Google example on github.com/asterisk. Aside from that, there's nothing really else. I can say that there are people using it for that purpose, but they have not made their code available. I talked to at least one at Astricon. So hopefully those will give you better insight into it. Maximum number of calls recent version Asterisk can support. The good old how many simultaneous calls can Asterisk support? There is no, it is between 1 and 1 million. And the reason I say that is that it completely depends upon your particular usage, whether media is going or not, whether transcoding is happening, whether you are recording stuff, whether you're playing back stuff, whether you're using AppQ, whether you're using ARI. There's just a lot of inherent variables that change the answer. So you really have to test your specific usage in order to be able to answer that. In the future, I hope one day we will be able to have particular narrow use cases with testing information and specifications and be able to give some rough estimates of those cases, but that does not currently exist.
Looks like if we have any other questions, folks, let's get them in now.
I see a free PBX question from Michael. Problem with Asterisk does not start after FW console restart. That could be a number of issues that are probably too detailed to get into in this format, but I recommend you open a thread at the Free PBX community forum, community.freepbx.org, with details, and get the experts to assist with that.
Excellent, folks.
Oh, I see another one. Is Q Wallboard still in beta for Trevor? Nope, it is not. I think Q Wallboard is the
Official
been
release.
in official release for a very long time now, years.
Well, everyone, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you very much to our speaker, Josh Colp, and also our special guest, Lauren Gates. We really appreciate your time today, folks, and thank you very much for coming out. Anything else you'd like to say?
No, just thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you very much.